Foie gras is something that is considered a delicacy. It is unfortunately actually a diseased liver.
By the time I came in contact with birds that had been raised for foie gras, I had already seen many thousands of ducks. I never saw anything like those that were in foie gras.
We as a society do not need this product, and foie gras production has no place in a society that values compassion.
These ducklings are already 2 weeks and 3 days.
I am Dr. Holly Cheever. I'm a practicing veterinarian here in the Albany, New York area. I've been in private practice since 1980, and in this practice, at which I have worked for the last 16 years, we take care of companion animals, but we also take care of wildlife, and that includes wild waterfowl such as ducks and geese. In addition, I have my own little farm where I, in fact, have some fowl of my own, and therefore I have worked with these species for a number of years. Foie gras is French for fatty liver, and this is an organ that has been expanded by abnormal feeding, forced feeding, 3 times a day for 4 weeks. And at the end of this forced feeding period, you have a liver that is so drastically enlarged beyond its normal size, 10 to 12 times normal size, that the bird is suffering. The liver itself has gone into liver failure, and if the bird had to feed itself to stay alive, it would die because the organ has gone. 3 times a day, they have a pipe inserted roughly down their throat, jammed straight down, and when you watch the videos, you can see very clearly, because their skin is quite thin, this tube zipping down to here and stopping dead, and then either by a hydraulic pumping system or by a gravity feed system, grain is delivered. By the time they get to be halfway through, the amount is doubled, and it is almost tripled by the time you get to the last week or so of feeding. The food has been analyzed, and it is not nutritionally complete. It is not adequate to sustain proper life, but it is adequate to create hepatic lipidosis in these livers, which is what they're looking for.
I'm Dr. Wardstone. I grew up in Columbia County, New York, in an agricultural area. I raised actually geese and ducks as a boy. Right in our backyard, we had 40 acres or so. And I loved the animals, and I loved the wildlife. I loved the free-ranging wildlife. That's why in graduate school, I went into pathology and parasitology. In 1969, I became the wildlife pathologist for New York State. And I have been the pathologist since that time. In this job, I'm responsible for diagnosing the causes of death in the state's wildlife, everything from frogs to moose, and of course an awful lot of birds. Over time, I've gotten more interested in some of the humane aspects of things. I did raise geese and ducks myself. I remember what they were like, going all the way from nesting right through. I can go back to my own personal experiences there, right through to what I see at the necropsies here on birds that were being raised for foie gras. Well, this is a necropsy report. It's a brief kind of a thing. History: hybrid male ducks were received by the Wildlife Pathology Unit. Both adult males, yellow paste filling the esophagus. Now that's the forced-in food. The lungs were edematous. They were swollen. They had fluid in them, hemorrhagic, so blood was present from hemorrhages. The liver showed extreme hepatomegalia and light color. Normal liver would have been about like that, and then these guys were actually like that. It would appear that the stresses of the final force feeding caused an acute respiratory limitation on ducks already suffering from pneumonia and severe hepatomegalia, restricting respiratory activity due to liver pressure on air sacs. This killed the ducks.
As that liver expands in their abdomen, there's no space for air in their air sacs and their lungs, and so every bird you see in the last third and fourth week of the feeding process is panting with a very high, shallow, abnormal, strained respiratory pattern, and is clearly uncomfortable.
There's a lot of pressure in that cavity, making it more difficult to breathe. You also can imagine that when a metal pipe is run down the esophagus, down into the gizzard area, the ventriculus area, and blasted food in there, when the animal is having difficulty breathing in the first place, now it's not very difficult to take little particles into the tracheal system and down into the lungs. So we often see a pneumonia in these late cases. So they've got little space, they've got a fragile big liver, they're displacing their respiratory tract, they often have infected feet from the kind of caging that they are put in.
As the abdomen swells out to an enormous size because of the expansion of the liver, they cannot walk. Their legs have to go down vertically, and they are thrown out off to the side laterally. And what you see in these very sad animals in their last week of feeding is that they are scrabbling with their wings to try to get away from the feeders, or pushing with their feet, but they cannot stand on them.
They have damage to their mouth and bills and esophagus from this pipe being run down into them. It's not a gentle kind of a thing.
The tube is not a nice, smooth, flexible rubber tube such as I would use if I had to save a duck who was not eating to try to restore it to strength. This is a tube with a diameter of about 1¼ inch, something about there. It's either plastic or metal. The edge is not beveled, it's very rough, and it is jammed down the throat, so it is roughly passed.
I learned about foie gras perhaps about 10 years ago, and in recent years I've become increasingly concerned about the way these animals are being mistreated. So Farm Sanctuary started campaigning to prohibit the cruelty of foie gras a few years ago. And since that time we've been able to pass laws in California, in Chicago, and we're now hoping to pass laws in other cities and states across the U.S. This is really an issue of information and education and awareness. And unfortunately, at this time, there's not enough awareness about what goes into foie gras production. And we believe that as people learn and as legislators learn, they're going to want to take a stand and to prevent this cruelty. Responsible restaurants and responsible chefs have already spoken out on this issue, and over 1,000 have now signed pledges not to serve foie gras because of the cruelty. And we hope more chefs will do that, and that this industry will just transition into something else. When I've been at hearings with foie gras producers, they have talked about how they force feed the birds, and the birds don't feel anything and they don't mind it and it's okay. And they've been asked, how do you really know that? And the fact is that foie gras producers who defend the practice, I think, have become somewhat jaded and don't recognize what they're doing to these animals.
My name is Izzy Anai. I'm the co-founder and the owner of Hudson Valley Foie Gras. We've been in business since '81 when I came to New York and I started the farm that was small then. Now we are the largest producer of foie gras in the United States. Now the thing I want to talk about, after Dr. Baltov was explaining very well that it is not harmful for the animals, this issue was already resolved. So why are we attacked? Why do I have to waste the whole day here and Marcus too? We are very weak. We don't have the budget, the power, the political crowd, the lobbies. We don't have anything. And since the practice is so intensive, because every duck has to be fed by the same person for 30 days, we cannot change hands. It's like in a restaurant, you have your own waiter all the time. And then also, people that never know, never saw the process, they think it's terrible. Force feeding, you think about Abu Ghraib, you think about all kind of bad things. So it's very easy to attack us.
Foie gras production and the hepatomegaly, this tremendous enlargement, this is clearly abnormal and pathological. They're not producing this kind of pathological thing on their own. If you just put the food out there, ad libitum, in other words, freedom to eat all they want and drink, they wouldn't get to the stage. the duck would cut off from eating that much. That's the very reason why they shoved the tube down and they forced the food in.
There really is no way to make a liver that big in a humane fashion because a bird could not possibly eat it naturally once that liver has become so deranged and so full of fat and so incapable of normal function.
We are eating the livers when they're produced in foie gras that are diseased livers produced by humans.
In the U.S., we don't really have much foie gras production. There's only a couple of farms that do it currently, and very few people eat foie gras. So there's really no reason that this practice should be allowed to continue.
There's no other form of agribusiness where we produce a food item that creates such a desperately sick organ inside such a desperately ill animal. And how can we as veterinarians or as the American public accept the intentional creation of a suffering animal?
I will continue to look at ducks and think about this issue and write about it and speak about it until it is either I'm gone or the foie gras is gone.